we are complete. So I propose we start with this afternoon's session. The first presentation we have this afternoon is on lessons learned from the first performance clearance exercise. And we have with us our colleague from DG Agri H3, Marina Zolotkov, who is going to do a presentation.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you had a nice lunch and are ready for another presentation. So my presentation will focus on the annual performance clearance and the lessons learned from the first year. I will walk you through the content of the presentation. First, I will give you a state of play of the annual performance clearance. Then the lessons learned. I will also mention the role of the certification bodies in this exercise, the points of attention for the next annual performance clearance exercise for the financial year 2024, and some of the outcome of the questions that we have received from the member states. So what has DG Agri done? The annual performance clearance objective is to look at each intervention with the declared expenditure if it has a corresponding output. For all the interventions with the excess of average value in the CAP strategic plan, we have analyzed the justifications. Only that information which was included in the annual performance reports and the information which was validated by the certification bodies has been taken into account. The acceptance of the justifications based on the CAP strategic plan, which was agreed on in the course of agreement of 9 of April, was considered. The outcome of the analysis of the justifications. So for 39 sectoral markets and for 4 rural development cases, there were justifications that we could not accept. For 7 cases in the apiculture intervention, the justification was not submitted in the annual performance report. For 5 cases, the expenditure which was reported was did not have a corresponding output. If justifications could not be accepted, then there were letters of finding that were sent to member states. In total, we have sent 19 letters of findings to member states after several internal discussions within DG Agri. So if the letter of finding was sent to the member state, what is next? The member state is expected to provide appropriate justifications with the relevant information which justifies the excess of the realized unit amount from the planned unit amount. It is expected to provide both the quantitative data and the qualitative information that would justify those deviations. And the elements of such a reply, they are included in the Regulation EU. The justifications could be providing the clarification for part of the deviation in case of the authorities of the member states could not provide the justification for the full deviation. We have also indicated that the member state could evaluate if the article of 134.6 could be appropriate to clarify those deviations. Unfortunately, there is only one iteration and no possibility to explain later in line with the regulation. So what happens after the receipt of the member state's reply? Once the new elements are received and analyzed by the DG Agri internally, those decisions of the Commission services would be informed in the Agricultural Funds Committee meeting in September. We are expecting to receive the duly justified reasons for those deviations. So the lessons learned of the first year annual performance clearance. We have identified several issues related to the submission of the annual performance report. For example, there were annual performance reports that have not followed the sequence. First, the submission of the annual accounts and then the submission of the annual performance reports. There were also issues that were related to the completion of the annual performance report, such as missing of the planned unit amount for interventions which had the expenditure reported in the APR. For an intervention which was planned to be implemented in the next financial years, however, which was implemented in the financial year 2023, there was no planned unit amount in the CAP strategic plan. There were also missing justifications for those interventions which had exceeding realized unit amount from the planned unit amount, or there were missing corresponding outputs for the expenditures which were reported in the APR. We have also identified some incorrect data which was reported in the APR related to the output indicator, which was calculated and reported incorrectly. Or there was a mathematical error in the CAP strategic plan, such as a wrong denominator was used to calculate the planned unit amount, in this way artificially decreasing it. There was also error in the unit of measurement, which was used. For example, instead of the number of the actions, there was number of the beekeepers used. Mistakes in the administration work. Money have been spent and booked on the wrong budget line, which have an impact on the annual accounts. So we would like to emphasize that the annual performance clearance is not about performance review, but it is about the clearance of account. We are not verifying how the money is spent or how the milestones or targets are reached. Only the public expenditure is subject to the annual performance exercise. And as per regulation, the justifications need to be provided for all the positive deviations of the realized unit amounts. We are not looking at the negative variances. So what is the certification body's role in the annual performance clearance exercise? In line with the regulation, the certification body shall apply the testing of records and databases to verify if reported performance, output indicators, and result indicators are correctly reported and match the expenditure. The certification body's work is about the verification of the calculation of those indicators, and the certification body shall verify the justification and confirm and validate. It is also in line with the regulation that the certification body shall issue an opinion and establish whether the member state's government system function properly in terms of the APR reporting systems. The performance reporting on the output indicators for the annual performance clearance should be correct. Also, the CB's role is to review that the data processing mechanism which is used for the annual performance reporting is accurate and validate the justifications that are supported by the underlying data. The certification body's role in the annual performance clearance exercise is about the audit objective 3, the assessment of the performance on output and result indicators. It is about the procedure used in the paying agencies and the coordination bodies that is used in the performance reporting. It is also about the IT systems that are ensuring that the compilation and the reconciliation of the quantitative information as well as the quality and reliability of the qualitative information and quantitative data. The points of attention of the next annual performance clearance. We would like to emphasize that for the next financial year, 2024, we would like to receive better justifications that include both the qualitative information and the quantitative data. And by this we mean that the information should be summarized and in a concise manner without providing any novels or a book. The information that is included in the annual performance report in the section 1 of the narrative part, if it is relevant to justify the deviations of the realized unit amount, these can be also included in the section 2 of the quantitative part of the APR. According to the regulation, the excess over 50% of the realized unit amount from the planned unit amount, it requires mandatory justification. However, the regulation at the moment does not specify that there is a threshold for the justification. So any excess which is 0.001% needs to be justified at the moment. So the member states are expected to provide the extent and the effect of the corrective actions that have been already taken to remedy those deviations and to prevent them from reoccurring. Next, the points of attention for the next financial year is to indicate by the certification bodies which are the version of the annual performance report that have been validated, because these are the source of the information for the annual performance clearance. The reporting of the outputs should be in line with the performance indicators and also in line with the type of the intervention. The review of the output reporting logic should be that is used in the APR should be reviewed by the certification bodies. For the interventions that are related to the EFRD funds, to ensure that the negative net amount does not contain the positive net amount, because that would require a reporting of the corresponding output. As mentioned before, the annual performance clearance exercise is not a performance review, but a clearance of accounts. And since this year it was the first year of the annual performance clearance with expenditure which was very low, next year we are expecting much significant and complex exercise. So it was, you may call it, just a rehearsal for a complete live orchestra next year. So as mentioned before, we have several updates or outcome of the questions that we have received from the member states. And we can inform you that we are adapting the reporting XML file. The approach that we have used, no news, good news, and we have applied for the letters of findings, that meaning that if you haven't received from us a letter of findings, then it means that it is cleared. We have taken this approach considering the simplification and the administrative burden as well requested by the member states in different fora. There will be also a possible clarification of the guideline 2 to whether what is the extent of the audit objective 2 audit findings and how do they impact the audit objective 3 opinion, and what is the scope of the validation of the justification by the certification bodies. We are also considering to reflect on providing the justifications for small deviations, which will be assessed if there are any possibilities for financial year 2024. However, it doesn't apply for the financial year 2023, as it's stated in the regulation. There are also possible clarifications or changes of the APR guidelines related to how to deal with the payments in the later financial years and late payments. Thank you.
Thank you, Marina. Are there any questions or comments? Yes, Spain.
Si lo he entendido bien, lo que se espera es que incluso en aquellos casos en que las desviaciones sean inferiores al 50%, deben de estar justificadas. Lo que quiero, o sea, deben de estar justificadas desde el primer euro que se exceda. ¿Cuál es el alcance del trabajo que deben realizar los organismos de certificación en ese caso? ¿Va a ser necesario que nosotros también revisemos esas justificaciones, aunque la desviación sea inferior al 50%?
Thank you for your question. So we have to leave what is in the regulation, and we have to apply the regulation. And the regulation says that what are the roles for the certification bodies in the exercise of the annual performance clearance.
I'm sorry, but I do not understand your answer because, I mean, we are auditors. We are not robots. We are. I do not understand.
So according.
What is our scope? Do we have to do a
Microphone.
Can we do a sample? Do we have to check how it's going to be our population? I mean, it's very fine. It's in the regulation, okay? But we are certification bodies. We are auditors. We are not. Okay?
Just for you.
We are not the ones that are. Perdón, sí, se me ha olvidado que puedo hablar en castellano. Nosotros somos organismos de certificación, somos auditores, no somos gestores. Y por lo tanto, pedirnos que verifiquemos la justificación de cada diferencia que supere desde el primer euro, es que realmente nos colapsan. Es que no sé si son conscientes del volumen de trabajo que nos exigen, ya a todos los niveles. Es decir, somos organismos de certificación, no somos robots, que no.
Thank you for your question. We understand the frustration and the challenges. However, as per Article 7.5 of the regulation, of the implementing regulation, the CBs shall apply testing of records and databases to verify if reported performance output indicators and result indicators are correctly reported. And the justifications are verified and validated and confirmed by the certification bodies. So all the justifications that are related to the deviations of 0.0001% of the realized unit amount.
Well, but we are asking for a procedure. We have to justify all. I do think it will be impossible. You know the amount of work of that.
By the paying agency.
So what we mean is that the certification body is giving an audit opinion towards the reliability of those justifications, which include quantifiable and qualitative information. So we are not asking you to justify, but to verify. And this is the application of the regulation.
Okay, other comments? Yes, I don't see Czech Republic. Okay.
Yeah, thank you. Just to go back to this point, wasn't it previously communicated that we just need to check the numbers and not, the justifications for the audit objective 3? Thank you.
Thanks. Please tell us.
I don't know, but I always understood it before that it was basically just the numbers.
No. Well, maybe then there was something missing in the communication channel, but two different things. When it comes to the work that the CB has to perform, as my colleague has indicated on the next slide, I think it's twofold. You have to test the IT system and see whether there is, and I will put it now under air quotes, like a copy-paste of the information in the thing rightfully, correctly. Yeah. Then there is a second element, which is the link of AO2 with AO3. We still agree on that? Okay, making progress. There we stopped at the time by informing you, because once there was a difference, there needs to be a justification. And that justification, that the CB shall validate the justification, is in the law, texto. So we did not see a need maybe at that time, or maybe we didn't say it because it was not prompted. But I remember the discussions so far were always about how much work CB had to do, how much in the sense of like what was the scope and what was the depth of the work they needed to do. To my knowledge and my recollection, we have never took position on the need to validate the justification. Okay? So for the Spanish delegation, 3 words: validate the justification. Not you have to come up with a justification. It is indeed the paying agency or the coordination body that has to come up with it. The only thing that we ask you to do is to see if that justification is sound, in the sense of correct. For instance, if a paying agency says, our outputs are now not 80, but like 3, that they validate the 3, and not that it is about 83. Yeah? Like in some member states. It was. That, thanks to the meetings we had, we could now see that in the calculation and the spreadsheets that were used in member states, there was a mistake in calculating the output and onwards. Okay? Have I not been exhaustive enough?
No, I understand. But this seems to me that it's more numbers, this thing. Which is what was before.
I think Austria was first before we go back to Spain.
I have two questions. The first one is this sequence, first the annual accounts and then the APR, that will be also the case in the financial year 2024? Or? Because there's a time problem, probably because the managing authority also wants to inform the National Monitoring Committee, and and we would and the annual accounts is linked with the CP report, and we need the time until the 15th or 15th of February, and then the annual the APR can be uploaded, and so the managing authority asked us to be earlier ready, because they want to have more time to inform the National Monitoring Committee in time before the APR is delivered. That's the first question. And the second one is, how is the cooperation between the Department C and the Department H? Because there's also an acceptance letter to the managing authority for the APR at the beginning of April. And we had this discussion with the technical problems that the APR had to be remedied, and then who is responsible for opening the SFC 21. Then I get the answer. It was for me reasonable that if it is concerns the content, then Department H would be responsible, and if it is technical assistance, then Department C would be responsible. I think it's a little bit difficult to meet the needs from the Department C and Department H.
Thank you for your question. So the first question related to the annual accounts, yes. The answer is yes. For the next financial year, 2024, the annual accounts will have to be submitted first, and then the submission of the annual performance reports has to follow. To the question related to the C and H, we are responsible in H of the annual performance clearance, and all the letters of findings that that have been sent to the member states, they are related to the performance clearance and the analysis of the justifications. So what has been sent by the C units, by the GO units, is related to their responsibility to the annual performance review and the annual performance reports.
It's okay, but I think there was a question who is responsible for opening this SFC 21. It was a concern of the paying agency and of the CP, when the managing authority asked us asked that they have to change something in the technical wise. So I think it's a little bit, we were a little bit confused that also Department C can open SFC 21 to make these alterations, and not only Department H. That was my concern.
Okay, if with permission, Chair, some clarification and some internal cuisine, if it helps you. Financial year 2023 was also the first year for us, okay? The system was set up over the period July-November last year, and this is not a mea culpa, but this is just facts. And it was designed based on, as was explained this morning in the presentation from C1, on the legislation in force at that time, under the principles at that time, and under the feedback we had received from member states, what they would see best as the way of interacting. The reality of things has shown that when it came to February 2024, the reality had a bit shifted, in the sense that all of a sudden the system was designed to be, in a way, rigid, to make sure that first you submit your accounts, then it goes into the system because there are cross-checks, automated cross-checks foreseen, etc. The admissibility is done by one unit in DG Agri, but the service provider to communicating to member states is another unit who is responsible for the paquet as a whole. Okay? Now, what was then appearing is that for some of the reasons that were listed in the presentation of my colleague, which I will come back to if you want, there were a bit information missing, this was missing, that was not supplied, and then according to the legislation, there was only one way we could do. We could reject everything. And that was looked at a bit maybe too fiercely in the first year, and then everybody calls against for flexibility, and you know how flexible an IT system is. Not. So, yes, we were a bit going back and forth, and maybe not the most efficient in financial year 23, but with the experience of financial year 23 that we have ourselves, and with the feedback that we will get from you, member states, CBs, paying agencies, coordination bodies, as indicated this morning in the presentation, in July, August, September, we will develop, enhance, try to improve for the next year to make it work. But I'm not guaranteeing that next year it will all be rosy and a nice song. Eh? So.
But by the end of the MFF, it will be.
Well, there you have the reply. At the end of the MFF, it will be all okay. No, but so we are counting on the direct questions. This morning we had questions from Portugal, we had a question from Spain, we have questions from Belgium and other member states, and these will help us to fine-tune as to make your life as CBs and paying agencies as quiet as possible and easy as possible.
Thank you, Mark. We are in this together. I mean, I can understand. I can understand the issues of everybody involved in this exercise and the IT developments also that need to. So, well, that's why we have this session, so we can improve next year and hopefully be more. So, who goes first, Ireland or France?
I don't know. I saw Ireland.
Okay.
Thank you. Just a clarification on a point that was on a previous slide on the presentation about considering the justification for small deviations. Would you mind clarifying, is that in the context of what the paying agency needs to report as a justification, or what the CB needs to report on when we review the deviations? Thank you.
So the justifications need to be provided in the annual performance report, which need to be analyzed in the context of the performance clearance. So paying agency is preparing the annual performance report, which is validated by the CB.
Perhaps my question wasn't clear enough, but just what I wanted to understand is where does the definition of small deviations come into it then?
The paying agency. So at the moment there is no the small deviation, meaning 0.0001. You can have as many zeros after the comma, but according to the regulation, there needs to be a justification. There is no threshold that stipulates that a deviation of 0.01% does not have to be justified.
Okay, thank you. I just thought when I read the slide that it meant
So
providing some further guidance to paying agencies to allow a threshold, but you're saying there won't be a threshold or won't be.
So what we say is that at the moment, the regulation does not stipulate that there is a threshold. So all the deviations need to be justified. However, based on the feedback that we received from the member states, we are now considering possibilities for the next year, so it does not apply to this year performance clearance exercise, but for next year, if there is a possibility to define the small deviations and to have a threshold, but this is under discussion.
Thank you, I understand.
Okay, and La France.
Oui, c'est juste pour bien comprendre le fondement effectivement du fait que vous demandez une justification effectivement pour tous les petits écarts. On est bien d'accord que ça vient de la définition de l'apurement de performance et de la phrase qui indique qu'il faut que les dépenses donnent... qu'il y a une problématique lorsque les dépenses ne donnent pas lieu à des réalisations correspondantes. Et c'est bien cette phrase-là qui fait que vous imposez systématiquement qu'il n'est pas possible de payer et d'avoir un montant unitaire réalisé supérieur même d'1 € au montant unitaire max. Et ce qui fait que vous imposez systématiquement les justifications. C'est le raisonnement ou...
OK. So, si vous voulez, je peux le faire aussi en français. Hein. Mais, so, but I will go in English. Just to annoy everybody. So, you cannot read the sentence in the regulation in isolation. So, where does it come from? For eligibility of expenditure, so for expenditure to be eligible for EU financing, the legislator has said there has to be a corresponding output, point. The legislator has said, well, look, the corresponding output, there has to be if the amount with the corresponding output is exceeding what was planned, then in principle, one could think that there is over-declaration of eligible expenditure because it starts from the premise in your plan. You plan an intervention, with an amount of X, an output of Y, so X times Y is what you're going to pay. If you pay more than the X times Y, in principle, there could be an issue. That's where the idea starts from. So we ask justifications. Why? Because the legislator has said, unless there is a justification, you cannot pay more than was in the plan. Hence, we need a justification for every excess. The legislator has also defined in the article that where there is no justification, the Commission shall. So it's not like we have a little option, it's we shall not pay, i.e. we will reduce the corresponding amount of the exceeding amount. That's the whole construction in the legislation. So where do we almost now go into a bit of a catch-21, not catch-22 yet, but catch-21, is that to have a justification, you need to ask it. But if you think you should not give one because it is a bit cumbersome, which we understand in a certain way from a personal point of view, if there is no justification, I cannot clear you. So, and then we're almost at catch-22. So what my colleague is indicating is that we have to see if we can get away from asking justifications on one hand, or two, to say, well, look, we would say that there is a pro forma justification for a difference of a certain amount or a certain percentage, but this is the discretion of the Commission, and so that's the whole discussion we have starting to have now, also based on our first-year experience and also the question that some member states have supplied to us. But at the stage of this season, some member states have asked the question whether the deviation is €1 or 1 million euro, the reduction is exactly the same in the sense that it is everything that is not justified, which is therefore above the plant unit amount times the number of outputs, in a nutshell.
Thank you. Is there a follow-up question from France, or can we move to Spain? Okay, Spain.
Muchas gracias y buenas tardes. Esta mañana tuve la ocasión de participar en el workshop sobre el informe anual del rendimiento y allí planteé una cuestión que considero que no ha sido contestada aún. En concreto, me refería a con qué criterio la Comisión va a evaluar una justificación y va a considerar que es válida o no. Puse un ejemplo esta mañana que me gustaría volver a comentar. Por ejemplo, en intervenciones no-SIG, cuando hay una convocatoria de proyectos de inversión y en un principio se ha planificado un importe unitario medio, pero, sin embargo, en esa convocatoria se presentan proyectos interesantes de un presupuesto muy alto que tienen como consecuencia que el importe unitario realizado, medio, es superior al planificado. Y me gustaría, por ejemplo, en este tipo de ejemplos, saber si se va a considerar que está justificado el hecho de contar con menos realizaciones, pero de un presupuesto mayor. Y si en ese caso la diferencia al alza con respecto al importe unitario planificado se considerará por parte de la Comisión que está justificado. Por otra parte, ustedes han comentado en su presentación que las desviaciones a la baja no se consideran y, efectivamente, no está previsto que cuando se consiguen mayor número de realizaciones, pero a un importe más barato, vamos a decir, porque al final el importe unitario es lo que cuesta cada realización. Parece un poco injusto que si ocurre al revés, que con el mismo presupuesto se obtienen muchas más realizaciones, entonces, bueno, pues no hay ninguna consecuencia. Porque además, en la lectura que hago del artículo 54.2 del Reglamento Horizontal 2116, en el literal de ese artículo se habla de corregir el gasto a nivel de intervención. Habla de una intervención, no de un importe unitario específico, porque una intervención, como ustedes saben, puede constar de muchos importes unitarios. Y esos importes unitarios realizados, unos pueden ser al alza y otros pueden ser a la baja. Y quizá en el global de la intervención, el nivel de realizaciones es adecuado. Y me gustaría saber si este literal del artículo 54.2 también se va a tener en cuenta por la Comisión en su liquidación del rendimiento. Gracias.
So thank you for your question. It has several sub-questions, but I'll try to reply, and then my colleague will proceed. So related to the criteria, as we have mentioned during the workshop this morning, there is no criteria. So the justifications need to clarify the excess, the deviations which are positive. So we are not looking at the negative deviations. We are not looking at the according to the regulation, part of the annual performance clearance is not looking at the deviations which are negative. We are not analyzing or reviewing if the performance indicators are met, if the milestones or targets are in line. So the criteria, that you can consider is the justification based on the quantifiable data and the qualitative information, which makes sense to justify the reasons why the realized unit amount is above the planned unit amount. And as you have mentioned, if there is an intervention with several projects, actions, you may evaluate if the Article 134.6 is appropriate to justify the deviations that you have. And as you have cited, there could be actions with the average unit amount, which is higher or lower. However, it's part of the Article 134.6 that you may consider.
Okay. Any more comments or questions?
Okay, thanks. Just to complement a bit what was said and to come back on a bit of examples. The question of the Spanish delegation is indeed a very substantial one and a correct one. But it is also substantial and layered in the problem. And just to clarify a bit is that I would like to split it in two. First of all, there is the angle of the paying agency and the project as such, and then there is the angle of the CB. When it comes to the paying agency and the working, we are aware of those situations and that they occur. It is for that reason that the legislator has decided that for actions where it is very difficult to put one unit amount, you can have an average unit amount. The average then takes into account highers and lowers in the equation. But in the end, what is the plan, and that has to be executed. So over time, you have to come to your average, or you have to review your average as part of a review, etc. This is also what we discussed, but that is certainly not the place of this forum. Secondly, if in a year, as you have indicated, as the Spanish delegation has indicated, you have more uptake, less uptake, bigger project or smaller projects, and therefore you're exceeding your average planned unit amount, the legislator has already foreseen a possibility for justification. It's called Article 134.6. You choose your option A, you choose your option B. The way, as a member state, for that intervention sees the best, is the most applied, is the best applied, is the best possible solution. Be aware that once you have chosen one option, it has to stay for the subsequent years, because otherwise, again, there we cannot otherwise follow the correct follow-up of an output over the years. So we are aware of all these things. So that is one element that you have to consider. I will now come to the angle of the CBs again. When we then come to validation of justifications and justifications as such, in the case as explained by Spain, what we'd be expecting is that if for every output there was a there was a payment and the payment was made correctly, we come to what we said earlier, is that the CB is validating basically his audit opinion too, and then says, well, look, I didn't find any problems there, and therefore, in principle, if I can, and I will air quote it again, copy-paste properly, there should be no problem with the quantitative information as such. And then it's only a question of, is this justification that the member state has provided confirmed in the sense of, like, is it verified and does it make sense in the sense of quantitatively, not qualitatively. You're not there to judge whether a justification is sound or not. You're only there to validate whether what the member state is saying is sound, is correct. Now, if you allow me. Just to give some examples why you have maybe received letters. A justification that says my output goes down and my expenditure goes up, and that's it. That's not justifying, That's explaining me arithmetic. Okay? Let's not beat around the bush. That's not justifying. If it is substantiated by, look, I had these outputs, and this is what I had to have, and this is the amount, and I calculate now correctly, not correctly, I demonstrated to you, these are my projects, and this is this, basically a bit Article 134.6. I'm not saying you have to use it, but it's a bit that logic. And if the CB indeed then says, yes, indeed, there were only 8 projects and there was only this amount, and yes, that figure is correct, that is acceptable. Okay? We had other explanations and other cases where it's like, we had more expenditure. Yeah, thank you. That we can see as well, but that's not justifying it. That's just informing me of something. So, also, like, if you go up to the 17th decimal after the comma, you will see we are okay. Yeah, right. That's also, again, explaining me arithmetic, not justifying. Now, I understand this was the first year and everybody's looking a bit his benchmarks and his bearings on the difference between explaining something and justifying something. And again, as my colleague has indicated in the presentation, the point is not that we have a book, but we would like to have the concrete not the buzzword, but the concrete element. What is the key factor of explaining the things? For the paying agencies, but also for CBs, but also for paying agencies. In the first year, so for financial year 23, we have only looked at what is in that section of the APR for justifications. When we had our technical meetings with member states, many said, yes, but in the quantitative and the qualitative information, the description in the other parts of my plan, I described the full thing what was there. Well, thanks for that, but just for your information, we are not looking at those things. Because, exactly for what is on the slide, the CB is only validating, and I put it now a bit summarily, that box for us. It's only that box. It's not the whole APR that is certified and the narrative. It's only that box. So please be attentive what comes in the box in the future, if ever you need to have a justification. That's some pointers of attention as well, I think we need to make. So then, just be reassured that we are talking to the desk. So if you have chats with the geodesks about changes in plans, etc., we're not deaf to them, but we need to validate what is there and to see that it is indeed in compliance with what the article also requires for member states to justify. They have to indicate what measures, what corrective action they take for the problem to address it or not to reoccur. That's also in the regulation, I think, if I'm not mistaken. Yes. So please be attentive. But again, I think for the first year, generally we got through it, not plain sailing, but without too much rough sea. Eh? I think also that is a message that we have to give across. You have received your letters, I understand. You had your technical meetings with us. Great. But in the end, what will matter is what we will do in September 2024. So I would like to take the occasion here for those member states who had technical meetings with us to be so constructive, helpful, and explaining, so that we also understood what was really behind it. But for sure, you will understand having technical meetings in the future for when the big show starts, and many interventions with justifications, that will be very difficult to have. So please, for your own sake and for my health, do the necessary on the justifications and be a bit in mind. And if there is a need for clarification, there is the Grecs in July and in September, so this is not the end yet. But I think I was not clear for Austria.
No, you're very clear, but I also have a question. As I understand and understood you correctly, you must not use this Article 134 to do the justifications if there are in non-IACs deviations from the forecast. If you have valid justifications, because if you use it once, you have to use it in every year. So, do I understand it correctly or no? Because it's a discussion in our country if we should use it or not.
So, the article, well, in legal text there are only 2 or 3 words that are really mattering, I think. It's the shall, must, may, or can, if you're lucky. So this is one where it says may, in addition. So that's what I thought as well, but okay.
Okay. Can we conclude, or is there any more burning questions to ask my colleagues? Okay, but thanks to all of you, especially my colleagues and you for your comments. So hoping that next year's exercise will be smoother and there will be more important amounts to clear also. So I propose we move into the next presentation, which is by BDO, is on the methodology of the annual performance report IT pilot audits that took place. And I understand Andrew Suyave, I hope I pronounced it correctly, is going to make this presentation. Mr. Suyave, you normally have the floor if you can wrap. So the floor is yours for presenting the methodology for the IT audits.
Okay, apologies for that. So I will share my screen and bring up the slides. If you just bear with me a second. I hope everyone is able to see this. So thank you very much for the opportunity to present here today. As you mentioned, this is the presentation of the methodology for IT audits on the performance reporting systems relating to the certifying bodies. My name is Andrew Suryav, so thank you for the introduction and close enough on the pronunciation. Nobody ever gets that right. I'm a director at BDO and I am the data lead on this particular program of work. What we're going to talk to you about today, at a very high level, talk about the audit methodology that we have in place, and that's the main 3 steps that we would go through as part of auditing the PRS. And we're then going to spend the majority of the presentation talking about the specific IT controls and validations that, that relate to the PRS and the quality of the data within. So this has been based on a number of pilot pieces of work conducted at various member states, which have looked to see the work that they have done around the establishment of their performance reporting system, and in one instance, look at the actual execution of a submission via the performance reporting system. So, looking first of all at the main steps in the audit methodology, our expectation is that, as with any type of IT audit or systems audit, the very first phase would be to gain an overview of the IT landscape.
Excuse me, I
yes.
need to interrupt you. There is a problem with the slides. We're still on the cover page, so I don't know if you are
okay.
scrolling.
I have been moving through them using the technology. So let me stop sharing them and see if there's a different way to do this.
Can you fix it?
Let me see what I can do. So
sorry for interaction. I think you should, before sharing the screen, you should launch the presentation. You should launch the presentation in PowerPoint, and afterwards you share the screen in interaction. It's a bug of the system. I don't know if I'm clear.
Yes, I think you are clear. So if I launch it using the slideshow.
You need to do a slideshow, exactly, and the full screen to be on the presentation.
How then do I share my screen on here? Sorry, beg your pardon. There's another option I have, there's another option I have, which is to potentially share the entire screen, and you can tell me if this is working. Can you see this? And see it moving through?
It works now.
It works now. Okay, excellent. Thank you. Yes, sorry, it must have been the way that I was presenting before. Thank you. As I was saying, the first step in any kind of IT or systems audit is to gain an overview of the IT landscape. So as this is a relatively new exercise for member states to go in and look at these performance reporting systems for the coordinating body, it's important that in the first year of audit, they spend a larger proportion of time investing in looking at the overall architecture of the organization, what the main systems are that might be connected together to perform the performance reporting system, the applications, databases, and such like, the various different modules, how they're integrated together, and just generally understand the way that data is pulled into the system from outside, how it moves through the system, and how any kind of calculations, transformations, and such like are executed. These are the sort of things that once they're performed in the first year and that is documented on a relevant file, they're the sort of things that can be carried forwards, improved upon year on year, but not necessarily have as much investment during each year's audit. So absolutely critical to get that overview in first of all. The second phase in our audit methodology really looks at what we call the IT general controls or system development controls. Now, what these are, IT general controls, are the way in which the coordinating body in this case will manage the changes to the system, to the PRS. They will manage the access, including privileged access, and they'll manage the various operational elements like the transfer of data across interfaces. And what we're looking to see is that there is a really solid foundation of good quality controls in place around those areas, so that whilst we are not there as the auditors, the system continues to function in the same way as what we see when we are there. So we might go along and do our audit and see some wonderful calculations being performed and some excellent validation rules and things like that. And what we want to know is that, 1 month later or 6 months later or 12 months later, those particular wonderful controls we saw have been retained in the same way, because the member state and the coordinating body have really excellent ways to control those particular changes and privileged access and such like. Where a coordinating body has ISO 27002 controls in place, then certain elements of reliance can be placed on those rather than attempting to perform any kind of over auditing. We should also understand any additional controls around data governance and data management, because as we all know, for these factors, the quality of the data that's being, placed into the system and looked after as it moves through the system is paramount. So when we've done those first two steps and we've understood the system and we've understood the way that the system is generally maintained, we move on to the third step, and that's what we're going to spend the majority of this presentation talking about. And this is the IT-specific controls and validations for the performance reporting system. So this includes concepts like the way that we input the data and validate it when it's input, the way that we track the calculations that are made throughout the system, the way that we might cross-check the data with other data sets, how we perform reconciliations of gross versus net amount and such like. Because we've got quite a few slides on this, I'm not going to dwell on it any further on this slide. And I'm just going to move forward to our overall summary of the IT controls and validations. So you can see the 4 boxes that we've got down there at the bottom. And what these represent is effectively the journey that data will make through the coordinating body. So as we're all aware, the coordinating body will obtain data in the first instance from the paying agencies. And it's very important that when that data is received, we ensure that it is complete and accurate. We do as much as is reasonably possible for a coordinating body with the information they have to validate that data. Now, those could be technical validations like ensuring it has the right characters or string length, or whether it's numbers rather than letters, that kind of thing. Or it can be particular functional validations, so seeing how it cross-checks against expectations we have from prior years or from budgets, or looking at how it matters in the context of particular known external data sets. As we move from that kind of ingestion point, we're going to have to move our data through the environment. So it might go into a staging area, it might move from a staging area into a validation area, or it might move from there into a calculation area to a reporting area. And as it moves through the system, we need to ensure that there are controls in place that will give us that comfort and guarantee of the completeness and accuracy as it continues to move through the system. So we'll have controls around data movement. We also need to ensure that where the data is changed in any way, that there are specific controls around that. So we would see the data being changed when there are calculations performed on it. So typically we would see aggregations of data being performed at the coordinating body as an example, or we might see certain multiplication factors and such like being performed in reporting. Transformations would be where the data fundamentally remains the same, but it might be given different reference codes or something along those lines in order to fit into a new system. And then finally, when we've ingested our data, we've moved it through the right places, and we've calculated and transformed things, we're going to get to the point of having an output. And it's really important at that output point that we have the relevant checks and balances around what is coming out of the system compared to what the expectations were. So there will be a variety of budgets at the outset. The paying agencies will have expectations of the output and such like, and being able to have the relevant processes to go through and validate what we're seeing in line with expectation means that we can come to a position where we are comfortable with the output, at which point we can move on, of course, to the eventual submission of the final report. As we're going through all these boxes, we're thinking a little bit about the design of the controls. So some of the things that we go on to talk about will be purely design, and we will be saying to auditors, effectively, you are looking to see whether this is in place or not. And some of them will be about testing the functioning of the controls. So, for example, we will see that there are multiple instances of something happening. The auditor will take a sample of those, and then the auditor will review the sample and extrapolate the correct functioning of the entire population. The remainder of the presentation is looking at each of those individual components, so each of those individual boxes in turn, and starting to think about what are the controls that we would expect to see at a coordinating body. So as we think about this, the general process of taking the data, transforming it, and creating a submission is common to all coordinating bodies in all member states. However, they may do things in a slightly different way. They are not mandated to have a particular system. They are not mandated to have a specific way of moving data through that system, but they are mandated to do certain things around the specific calculations, the specific rules of what can and can't be done with the data and the particular format of the output. So in order to hit those targets, they need to be doing their process in a relatively similar manner. So when we have designed these controls, we've effectively looked to pitch them at a level that recognizes that we cannot talk specifically about this particular Oracle database or that particular interface control that might be in place, but still to be able to pitch them at a level that is sufficiently granular for the auditors to be able to operate with and to recognize the control when they see it in the specific environment in front of them. So focusing on the data ingestion, first of all, the first point really here is around data requirements. So it's important for the auditor to understand that there is effectively a contract formed between the coordinating body and the paying agency in terms of understanding exactly what data is being received from the paying agency, what the definition of each of those data points is, and how the coordinating body is going to receive those and store them. This sort of interface contract, as you might call it, is effectively that shared knowledge so that both parties have a common understanding of exactly what it is that's being transferred. And this is critical to setting up any kind of transfer, and also critical for the coordinating body as they continue to do their processing to truly understand what it is that they have and what they're working with. The next point on there is really that the data requirements have been mapped to show what data is required for each indicator against each intervention. So by doing that, we ensure that all the data that's ingested at the coordinating body can be checked to make sure that all data points are present and that there's nothing that's coming in that is either an invalid data point or that we're missing something that's needed in order to generate the indicators for each intervention. So in theory, if we do this data requirements bit right, then we've got a brilliant definition of all that data. We know exactly what's coming in and we know exactly how it's going to be mapped once it's in our systems. So this is effectively the blueprint for how we're going to get that data. We're going to put it in there. We're going to get it into that, that first kind of phase within the coordinating body. So if we have that blueprint, then the next stage is really around the data validation. So it's making sure that when we receive data that fits that blueprint, we are able to do the relevant checks on it. So the first type of check that we would normally see is that there is technical data validation to make sure that we've got the right file format, we've got the right data format, and that effectively what's being sent over is what was expected. We haven't been sent a file that isn't ready for processing by our systems because it's a different extension type on the file. We haven't been sent it with the columns misaligned in the data sets, that kind of thing. So we do those first technical validations, and what that should do is make sure that we have files that will pass the acceptance and can be sort of passed forward into the relevant staging area within the performance reporting system, and work can then be done on that. There should also, obviously, as part of technical validation checks, be processes and controls around rejection. So if something comes in and it's not the right file type, it should reject that, and obviously in that situation be informing the parties that this has been rejected. So the coordinating body should know it's been rejected, and the paying agency that submitted should know it's rejected, so that we can go again and attempt to put things in the right format and really get to that point of having the data transferred correctly. Once we've done the technical validation, what we're looking to do next is the functional data validation checks. So the idea behind this is that for each of those data fields that's coming over, we will know certain things that must be true of that data. For example, it must be a number. It must have a particular value within a range. It is not allowed to be zero. These are the sort of rules that can be applied on an individual data field by data field as part of validation rules. That type of check is going to tell us if basically we're going to fail when we do any later calculations and later mapping. So we get those first two checks in place, and we have a set of data that's all in the right structure, all in the right format, and we can move on to the next phase, the third tick there under data validation, which is really trying to check the master data, check the data that we're getting against the master data we already have in the system, against as many external sources as possible, looking against reference data. So for example, looking to see we've got the correct CSP reference data, the reporting financial year. Or we're looking against things like, the expectations we have from budgets from prior years. So are we wildly different in this data from what our expectation on the budget was? Now, these checks are always going to be a little bit harder to do potentially than some of the basic kind of technical and functional data validation checks, but we'll definitely be looking to the auditors to see what is in place and where they might be able to provide I suppose, audit recommendations as to other data sources that could possibly be used. As it says on the screen, this type of check isn't necessarily going to block a submission, because if something is 10 or 20% above a budget, it doesn't mean it's wrong. But it does allow us to detect issues at an early stage that allow feedback prior to going through the later transformations, calculations, aggregations, and such like, so that we only ever give the problem back at the very last date. So it allows the coordinating body to turn around to the paying agency and say, are we absolutely sure about this? It looks like there might be an issue based on our comparisons to alternate data sets. And then the final point on there really relates into one of the earlier points, and this is mostly around security, to be honest, on this particular one. And this is that files have come across with associated metadata. So this is like a secondary file that comes across with them that effectively contains some of the data about what is in the main file. So it will say, you should expect this many columns in the file. You should expect the total of each column to add up to this amount in the file. And what that metadata does is effectively to say that your file has not been tampered with in transfer and that its integrity is maintained. So those are the kind of basic data ingestion and validation rules. We also look to perform checks where possible on duplication. So it is, of course, possible that a file could come across which meets all of those validation rules that we've talked about, and yes, it's the same file that was sent last month. So there should be a form of checks based in the system to ensure that if we've sent data that's already been received, that can be noted and flagged, and then obviously the paying agency notified and the correct file sent. There is the possibility at a few stages within this process, effectively, of double counting. So we want the auditors to try and ensure that the input data has been brought through at a level of granularity that allows the coordinating body to do any elements of validation or sense check about possible double counting calculations. So as it says here, duplications are often identifiable when cross-referencing a globally unique identifier. So if we have a particular reference that is unique to that particular transaction, if we've got the transactions in a disaggregated manner at the coordinating body, we can spot that. Whereas if the transactions are all aggregated together prior to being sent over, we lose the capacity to be able to identify that double counting. Data corrections there. So as I mentioned previously, we've got that process in place when we find any potential validation errors or discrepancies. And that process should be there in order for the kind of loop back to the paying agency to inform them that something looks wrong, so that the investigations can be made and possibly corrected at an early stage. And then, again, as I mentioned before, around file rejections, those should really be notified to all parties. There should be an understanding of it. And also, one of the points here is not so much just that the files should be rejected and the files should be resent, but there should really be a learning from that. So if the files are rejected based on certain validation rules, then ideally there would be improvements made in that transfer process in a kind of iterative manner between the coordinating body and the paying agency to ensure that learnings are had and the mistake is effectively not made again. So the next area that we want to talk about after we've done that data ingestion is really just the controls around the transfer validation. So as I mentioned before, data moving between various storage locations. Now, if I think about a particular coordinating body that we visited, the vast majority of the transfers of data they had were within a single, effectively single database environment. So they were just moving it from one staging table to a validation table to another table. In those kind of scenarios where you have a well-established data management tool that is designed to move data between tables, it's got its own inbuilt checks within the tool to tell you whether those transfers succeeded or not, then we can generally rely on those tools doing their job correctly. However, if the coordinating body has set something unique up where they are doing transfers of their own accord, they are effectively writing these transfers themselves and moving them from point A to point B, then we want to ensure that as part of writing those transfers and getting the data to move from, say, one database to a completely different database, that they have put error monitoring type controls in place to make sure that what was sent from database A is exactly what we received in database B, that there hasn't been any loss of data, any transposition of data, any duplication or rewriting or anything along those lines. So just making sure that we've got those kind of data transfer validation controls in play. In terms of the controls that we looked at around calculations and transformations, the first point we've got there around calculations is really that when we are performing some form of calculation, it's going to effectively write that newly calculated figure into its own specific database field. Now, it is possible, as we did with the data import, to put certain validation rules on those fields to make sure that a calculation appears in a particular range that we expected, that it is not zero. So in other words, if it was zero, it might be an indication that the calculation was incorrect and did not perform correctly. Sorry, just losing my track slightly there. So we absolutely want to look at that. But if systems do not do that, if they're not doing particular checks on the calculations like that, what we would look to see is that there were an element of ongoing, I suppose, manual checks. So the coordinating body, when they implemented the system and they built these calculations, that they had checked those calculations multiple times with multiple test scripts over multiple scenarios to ensure that they have that reliance on the calculation working every time. And again, that's the sort of thing that you would do when you're first implementing the PRS. But good practice would suggest that every so often, especially if you're making various changes to the system, you would go back and re-baseline those calculations and just make absolutely sure that when they were working 2 or 3 years ago, that actually they have continued to work just as well through the various changes that have been made. And just putting those sort of point-in-time markers every year, every 2 or 3 years, to make sure that these are re-baselined can be an important thing for the coordinating bodies to do. We have a double counting at this stage as well. So obviously, if we're changing the data in some way, transforming it, calculating with it, and such like, we need to make sure again at this stage that we don't have any double counting. We don't have things that have been accidentally written twice as part of the calculation, that we haven't taken through both the original value and the calculated value. And that again is done through potential checks around not having multiple instances of a unique identifier, or checking it against uniqueness of data when looking at things like duplicate beneficiaries, and as it says there, checking the single claim principle within the claim year. So different things that can be done, not always going to be done the same way by the different coordinating bodies, but different options there for applying this general principle of detecting double counting. The final area that we have in here is around output review and validation. So, one of the key things here is that manual review. We've got the variety of previous automated checks on validation, but what is critical for any of these types of processes is that the people who truly understand the data and what the output should be like get to put their eyes onto that data and judge it in the context of their experience and their knowledge and their expectations. So I think one of the areas where we've seen good practice performed at one of the particular coordinating bodies we saw is that they were making the calculations of the data submissions available throughout the year. So the paying agencies had the ability to log in externally or receive these files through a particular transfer, and they could check early on to spot any anomalies and resolve them as part of the process. So that's the sort of thing that will happen multiple times throughout the year on multiple different applications, and it's the sort of thing that can be checked. And obviously, if there's a particular issue with a calculation or a particular issue with something else around the reporting and the output, that can be detected relatively soon. We've also got a particular control there around draft submissions that are generated by the coordinating body being validated by the paying agencies to confirm accuracy. And so this is the not just the things that happen throughout the year, but the kind of final, at the end of the year, before we're ready to do the final submission, getting that draft submission out there, and ensuring that the paying agencies can check that back to the periodic submissions of expenditure to DG Agri. Some of the other elements of the validation of that submission. So we would expect that there is a control operated at the coordinating body whereby the gross expenditure that's declared in the APR are subject to the reconciliation with the net expenditure from the annual accounts. So we would very much hope that when we are going to look at the systems, that they are performing such a reconciliation in an automated manner, and that any discrepancies are reported for further investigation and correction. So, as it says here, the CB is to reperform the reconciliation of the gross versus net. One of the other factors here for validating the submission is the reconciliation of the values of the total output indicators and expenditure. So at the level of the planned unit amount that's calculated at the paying agency levels against the totals that are then consolidated at the APR level. We have another submission validation, so the benchmarks that are reported using the options under Article 1436A or B of the Regulation 2021-2115. The performance reporting system should provide an automated control ensuring that the same calculation and reporting is followed in all subsequent financial years following the first year when this option was used. So effectively ensuring that what we are operating in the first year is maintained consistent through the following years. And obviously, if something is different, then the system should be reporting on any discrepancies for any further investigation or correction. Final couple of submission validations. So an obvious one there is that when we produce the APR, the system can produce it in the expected format to be submitted to the EC system. So there is a specific nominated format, and there may be changes or developments to that format, and there should also be some kind of awareness and understanding of the people at the coordinating body of what is the latest format, what are the latest expectations on us, and how have we built those expectations and that format into the way that our system works. And then finally, the result of the validation rules that are executed by SFC is analysed, and any inconsistencies are resolved and explained. In terms of a couple of final controls around the output review and validation. One of the key things here, because we have effectively an approval step going on at the point of the creation of this file and the submission of the file, it's important to maintain segregation of duties where possible, just to make absolutely sure that we don't have a submission that is coming out of the system where a single person is the only one to cast eyes on that and the only one to be uploading it at the end of the process. So we would hopefully make sure that that is built into the system itself, so that we can have for example, workflowed checks where someone has to effectively sign on the system to say that they have reviewed it, and someone has to sign to say that they have approved that review. But if that's not manageable within the system, there should be effectively policies and processes in place to ensure that there are those, as they call it, that 4I principle is followed to make sure that we have those quality checks and those double checks on submissions. And then final point on here really is that justification of any deviations in the APR. So we have our expectation of what the results are going to be, and that if we have deviations from those, then we get the appropriate explanations from the particular business unit's concerned. So it's just important that the system is able to capture all of those justifications for the deviations, and that when it comes to any kind of audit review and the submission reconciliation, that those justifications can be retrieved in a format that is available for audit, and that people can see why it was that those deviations were there. So everything that I have spoken to up until this point has effectively been around controls. So that has been the auditor looking at the mechanisms by which the system has degrees of automated checks and balances, or there are manual checks and balances in the process through review by individuals. But at the heart of any good quality audit, we have to recognize that at some point there needs to be a degree of sample testing, a degree of substantive testing of data. It's not necessarily enough to say that we have these robust looking and operating controls in place, but in order to sort of close the loop on the audit, so to speak, we need to have traced a degree of actual data through the process and validated that that actual data has made it through those calculations and transformations in the correct way and has come out of the other side. So one of our recommendations around this audit approach is effectively that there should be some sample testing of data lines from input files. So we should start at the beginning of the process, and we should look to ensure that those items that begin at the start of the process from the paying agencies move through correctly and get to the point at the end of the various calculations, aggregations and such like, that we recognize the output that comes out of the other side, and we are happy as auditors that it has been through the right processes. As much as possible, we would reuse the items that have been tested for AO2. And as I say, we're tracing those through each stage of the processing. The other side of things, if we're looking at both validity and accuracy, is that as well as looking at things traveling through the process in the correct way and making sure they follow the right pathway, we should effectively be trying to look at things that are, from an audit perspective, going the other way. So looking at the final results and saying, okay, this is what our submission was, our output. Has that been constructed, as it were, from the right original set of data that we can see? So there's an element of tracing things back, and for a sample of outputs in the APR to validate that we can track back and see that that effectively came from a valid input file. Now, this one is always going to be a harder activity to perform, so it doesn't need to be a full reconciliation, but it's really just trying to look for that proof that the APR itself does not include anything that can't effectively be traced back in some way to an input that came from the paying agency system. In other words, there is nothing that has ended up there that has not somehow injected itself at some point throughout the process, either through an element of perhaps a duplication that's occurred, or through some sort of accidental insertion of data at some point in the process. So by tracking that data back, we're effectively, or a sample of that data back, we're effectively being able to show that we are comfortable that nothing has been pushed into the process unnecessarily. So I think this is the last slide that we have in the deck before we move on to any particular questions. And this one's really looking at some observations that have been based on the reviews that we performed. So the key one, as I said at the outset, is that this fundamental process of capturing the paying agency data, performing the calculations, creating the output, validating, and so on, is effectively the same for all member states. It will be done in slightly different ways, in slightly different systems, and some will be more manual than others, and some will be more automated than others. But it is possible to have a common structure of an audit methodology. And not only is it possible, but it is appropriate to have a common structure to the audit methodology, and hence why we look to propose the one that we are talking about today. However, as the second bullet there says, because there are those significant differences in the architecture, we can't create a checklist methodology in the sense of making a series of work programs for auditors that say you must be able to see this particular validation rule on this particular data field. It's unfortunate that that can't be done because you know, it would be much easier if we were able to do something like that. But what you would not want is to go as granular as that and say, you know, you must see this particular validation rule on that data field, and then for people to be failing an audit based on something that they had managed to control in an entirely different way that is just as appropriate, but is not necessarily quite the same as perhaps that audit program had expected. And then one of the final points here that came out of some time that we spent at the final coordinating body is that within the particular member states, we do not necessarily have the auditors who can spend significant proportions of their year looking at the PRS and looking at every single validation rule within every single control. This is not something that is possible, and I don't think it would necessarily be desirable either. What the auditors should aim to do through this program is to effectively understand the principles that are being followed. So, for example, understand that there are specific functional data validation rules built within the system. Ensure that those are well documented through a good quality design document, and then look to do some basic sample checks on those, for example. So look to see that out of 100 different data validation rules, 5 of them were appropriate types of rules for the data concerned, and that those had made their ways from the design documents into full operation in the system. So we're looking for something that allows the auditors to work to the timelines and budgets and such like that they are able to do, whilst focusing on those really key areas, looking more at how the coordinating body has managed and controlled this themselves, rather than necessarily trying to do a full review, as I say, of every single rule, every single calculation, every single transformation. I think outside of this, the only other thing that I suppose I would add in terms of observations based on our review is that as we are looking at a coordinating body validation process here, it's important to state that the coordinating bodies that we saw effectively made very clear that the data that they receive from the paying agencies is something that they can control the quality of once they receive it, but they cannot necessarily speak themselves to the kind of underlying substantiation of that data. So if there is a particular claim in there, then they can absolutely make sure that the integrity of that claim and everything that's done with it afterwards, once they've received it, is good. But they can't say whether or not the support for that claim that belongs at the paying agency is necessarily valid. And they just wanted, I guess, when we've spoken to them, to always ensure that the auditors are remembering that point, that they have a particular block in the process that they are responsible for, and it is the point of receiving the data and then taking it from there to the point of the submission of the report. So that concludes the presentation on the particular methodology. And as the slide here says, any questions? And if it's okay, I will stop presenting the deck so I can actually see the faces of people who might ask questions.
Actually, before we pass to any questions, thank you very much for your presentation. I would like to give the floor to my colleague Claudio Matake from DG Agri H1 to wrap up some internal considerations on the methodology. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Andrew, for the presentation. Just a few quick points. Try not to repeat too much from what has been presented, or ideally not at all, but just to have a few conclusions and just to give you some additional information about the next steps in terms of distribution of the methodology and your feedback. So, as it was indicated throughout the slides, and particularly on the last one, the methodology that was developed by DG Agri together with BDO, the external contractor, the aim was to create a framework to allow you to have a common approach and a common context towards the IT auditing of the performance reporting systems. At the same time, we know that the context in each member state might be different from the other member states. So the idea was to have a methodology that is adaptable, tailorable, and flexible to your specifics. So some parts, as indicated, can be skipped. For example, you've heard a lot about data ingestion. You've heard about a lot of different rejecting of the files. Maybe for your specific setup in your member state, this is not applicable because there is only one paying agency and there is no data ingestion because everything is within a database. However, other parts of the methodology like data transformation, data movement, will be definitely applicable because the data, even if it's within one database, it will be probably moved into a data warehouse, or it will be for surely aggregated and calculated for the production of the APR. So just to bear this in mind, that the methodology was designed to consider let's say the most complex scenarios. However, you have the possibility to customize it, to tailor it according to your specific setup. The controls in the methodological document that will be shared with you shortly basically focus on what was considered to be essential. However, we included additional controls and check in an appendix. So if you want to have additional, let's say, inspiration, or you want to go further to pursue in more detail some parts of the methodology or the main steps that were presented on the slide, you can find additional controls and additional questions, possible questions that you can ask during your audit work in the appendix. Then, once you have done the work, the reporting of your conclusions should be done according to the instructions in the guideline 3. However, we believe that the working documents that you have produced during the process are very important. I mean, maybe you will not have to provide all this information up front, but it's very important to have it and to document all the work indicating what controls from methodology have been tested and how have been tested, and this particularly in case of IT audits from DG Agri. And as a final remark, I would just like to mention that the methodology document will be shortly uploaded to Circa BC. Unfortunately, we were not able to share with you before this meeting due to a very tight timeline that we had and the very last minute updates that we had to make to the document. However, we will make sure that will be uploaded shortly. And of course, we invite you to consider it and to provide your feedback as soon as possible. And we will use this feedback to further fine-tune the methodology, as well as we will use the lesson learned from the next annual performance or annual assurance package reporting or certification reporting exercise for next year, as well as the lesson learned from the DG Agri IT audits that we'll be performing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Claudio. It looks like we have a question in the chat from Luxembourg. And the question is, do we have to do this APR IT audit before 15th of February 2025?
So this exercise should be part of your annual certification work. It's not separate IT audit that should be performed by certification body. It should be integrated in your annual certification work. And the aim of the methodology is to give you guidance on how to perform this part of the work, but has to be put into the context, as it was also mentioned on the slides, that for sample testing, they should be as much as possible linked with the audit objective too. So there should be done, or the entire work should be done in the context of the annual certification exercise, not under the audit objective 3.
Thank you. Other questions from here? Is that Ireland? Yes.
Thank you, and thanks, Andrew, for the presentation. It's very clear how important the IT audit approach is going to be to our audit for FY24 and future years. And I just wanted to focus specifically on step 2 in the proposed process, which is the testing of IT general controls, which I know is going to be an important feature before we even move on to testing, the other kind of manual controls or automated controls. You mentioned in the presentation that CBs can look at the ISO certification and then build on top of that, additional controls in order to get comfortable with the IT general control environment. And I'm just curious to know, based on the preventative audits that have taken place to date, if there's been any discussion around the kind of gaps between what ISO certification provides and what IT general control testing might require, and if there's any guidance likely to be issued in terms of that for certification bodies. We've had a lot of discussion with our paying agency over the last year about the difference between ISO certification and the requirements of IT general control testing. And sometimes that's a difficult conversation to try and explain that we might need to do more testing than ISO certification requires. So I always feel that, more guidance in relation to that particular gap would be helpful, given how important the IT audit approach is this year, and particularly step 2 in that 3-step process.
Yes. So you're absolutely right that, unfortunately, we have something like ISO 27001 that is focused really on a lot of principles of IT security and IT good governance that is not in lockstep with IT general controls, should I say. The IT general controls, as you're effectively alluding to there, should take priority. That is the element that you are fundamentally trying to prove out. So the controls around, specifying changes, testing changes, ensuring the version control of those, looking at privileged access and such like. But to your point, there are elements within the ISO where those are achieved. And I think, Claudio, you might want to come in here, but I don't think that the document as it stands at present contains necessarily a one-to-one mapping for those, right?
Yes, just to add that, indeed, for the step 2, IT general controls and system development controls, the general IT controls are the ones that were indicated on the slides that were considered for the development of the methodology, and mainly focusing on the ISO information security controls, as well as on controls for data governance and data management. However, these type of controls are controls applicable in general to the organization, not particularly specifically to performance reporting systems or to the APR. So this can be seen in a larger context. Of course, they are important. However, the methodology, we try to focus it as much as possible on the performance reporting systems and APR. If you believe that some additional controls, overarching controls, should be tested in this domain, then we would just welcome this, but it has to be done, of course, with a proportionate effort, and also with a proportionate effort from the paying agency to implement all these controls.
Franz has a question.
Oui, merci beaucoup pour cette présentation extrêmement claire et complète. J'aurais juste une question concernant le périmètre en fait de cet audit. Donc là, peut-être plus à la destination de la commission. Parce qu'en effet, on a des systèmes d'information, donc en bout de chaîne, des applications, enfin en tout cas en France, qui vont agréger et calculer les indicateurs de réalisation et de résultats. Mais en amont de ce système de calcul pour produire le rapport annuel de performance, on va avoir tout un tas de systèmes. Donc le système SIGC qui est composé de 35 modules, 19 applications, enfin qui est très très large. Et pour le hors SIGC, on va avoir des aides régionalisées avec 18 systèmes d'information régionales, des mesures de marché qui sont elles-mêmes instruites sur différentes applications de gestion. Et donc, je voulais un peu avoir des précisions, des orientations sur le fait que, on se concentre sur un périmètre exclusivement sur le périmètre du RAP, calcul des indicateurs de résultats et agrégation, ou si on devait vraiment prendre la totalité des systèmes d'information de tous les organismes payeurs. Merci.
Thanks. So I appreciate the sense of that question. So the perimeter, as you describe it, is in terms of this particular methodology and the particular sort of brief behind this methodology is for the coordinating body and the systems held at the coordinating body. So obviously you've mentioned elements there of the paying agency, and we recognise the regional structure that you discussed in France and the fact that there are multiple systems throughout those paying agencies. But Claudio, unless you want to add anything particular to it, the perimeter intent of this is for the coordinating body, correct?
Yes, thank you, Andrew. Indeed, as I mentioned earlier, the scope of the methodology is primarily linked to the certification work for the audit objective 3. So the goal and the aim and the perimeter is, let's say, clearly defined around the setup of the systems for performance reporting. In addition to that, the data as well needs to be checked. So basically, we are focusing on the design of the systems, which is tested, let's say, in the beginning or until the level where those systems have reached full maturity and they become stable. However, the data that goes through those systems has to be verified, or the controls associated with that needs to be verified every year. Beyond this, as you mentioned, the other information systems that provide data, or that where the data is created, is produced before reaching the level of aggregation and reporting, they are not directly in the scope of the setup of the systems in this methodology or the design of the system. However, the data coming into the performance reporting system, it is, as we indicated earlier, we'd like that you link as much as possible the sampling and the checks between audit objective 2 and audit objective 3. And the actual verification of the data outside performance reporting systems will be done under the audit objective 2. So I hope this clarifies your question.
Any more questions or follow-up comments? If not, we are just in time for coffee, so right on schedule. So, sorry. Excuse me. Claudio has something to add. Yes.
So just to come back to the feedback I mentioned earlier, would it be possible to have your remarks, comments within the next 2 weeks? Would that be something that you could do, as we want really to fine-tune and to wrap up and to reach, let's say, a final document for this moment? We would like to have your feedback as soon as possible.
Once we upload it.
After we have uploaded it, of course.
So does 2 weeks sound reasonable for providing feedback? Okay, that's tacit agreement, or you need coffee? A little bit more, okay? 3 weeks.
Okay, 3 weeks then.
For 3 weeks. Okay, great. So thanks to everybody for the presentations and for the comments. So let's have 15-minute break. Please be back. Okay, I'll give you a couple of minutes more. Please be back at 4:20 so we can stick to the schedule. Thank you.
Hello, can you hear us? Hello?
Hello, Mr. Klionis. I'm there for the test.
Yes, now I'm speaking because we thought that Java microphones should be all right, and then
Wait 1 minute, I can't hear you. 1 minute.